All right, I don't know if this got said earlier, but fellas, next week is Mother's Day, okay? So I know I don't need to remind the ladies in the building, but guys, next Sunday is Mother's Day. Don't forget, make sure you get those presents, make that order. Don't wait. CVS runs out of flowers on Saturday around like 11. So you got to get there before to get your Mother's Day flowers for your wife or your mom or whoever, for that special someone. We have spent the last 3 weeks talking about going all in with Jesus. We've told stories about people who gave radically, people who took massive risks, people who stepped out in faith, and how God uses those acts of faith, those leaps of faith, to do extraordinary things. We're looking at this because God doesn't want a bunch of fans. Jesus does not need fans sitting on the sideline clapping along as he's working out his mission. He needs fully devoted followers. But can I be honest with you for a second? I think you might agree with this. Those stories of massive risk, those stories of radical generosity, those are really easy to hear in a sermon on Sunday. They're a lot harder to actually put into practice on Monday. Can we agree on this? It's awesome to hear stories of people who emptied their bank account and everything worked out perfect, but we're not telling the stories of the people who everything didn't work out, right? And it's like, well, what if I do it and things don't work out? What if I take a leap of faith? What if I quit my job? What if I end that relationship and then I feel lonely? What if I quit that job and the door to that $1 million paycheck I've been waiting for doesn't immediately open up and suddenly I'm struggling? Going all in means wrestling with those feelings of fear and doubt. We start asking ourselves, what if this all goes wrong? What if I mess this up? What if I do something radical and then I find out that that wasn't actually God's voice? What if I was mistaken? What if I take a leap of faith and God says, whoa, that was not my idea, dude? What if I go all in? What if I dive in completely, but I panic? What happens if I pull back out? Will God still love me? Will he give me a second chance? Maybe you're here and you're thinking, I went in years ago. I said I was all in, and then I slipped and I fell and I stumbled and I gave up because it was too hard, and now I don't think that God actually wants me anymore. He'll just use somebody else that he knows he can trust. Why would he ever call me? This is probably where most of us live. This wrestling match between fear and doubt, but also that desire to go deeper, that desire to experience something amazing with God. So today, I want to look at the story not of someone who nails it, who always gets it right, but somebody who has amazing moments of extreme faith that are often followed up by huge stumbles. Huge failures. And I actually gravitate towards this person in Scripture because I feel like it's my story. If I can be honest with you for a moment, I did not have a conversion moment where one day I was bad and then I met Jesus, and from that point forward, I've never done anything wrong. That's not my story. I didn't have this radical transformation that happened all at once. Instead, my life has been a series of like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, half step back, over and over and over. It's these times where I'll go all in, I'll slip up, I'll fail, and I need God to remind me that he hasn't given up on me yet. This guy's name is Peter. Peter is one of the 12 disciples. He walked with Jesus throughout Jesus' ministry here on earth. Peter is passionate. Peter is bold. He is decisive. But he's also flaky and fearful and skittish. Peter is a picture of what it looks like to go all in with Jesus and then need to do it again and again and again. Today, we're going to look at a story from Peter's life that I think serves as sort of a microcosm of his entire journey. This story is a picture of basically every moment of Peter's life. It's a story where there's an extreme, kind of radical act of faith. He does something that he can still to this day say, I am the only human being ever to do this thing. I'm the only person that has ever done this. But in the same story, he fails miserably. It's the story where Peter walks on water. He is still to this day the only person that can say, I've walked on water with Jesus. I've taken a stroll across the sea with him. In this story, we see Peter wrestling with what it looks like to go all in. We see courage, the courage to leap off the side of the boat in the middle of a storm and walk out towards Jesus. We see fear. We see faith, and we see failure. But we also see the entire time that Jesus is right there, ready to pick Peter up when he starts to fall, and lift him up and restore him and give him another chance. And I think that's most of our reality is when we try to go on all in, we'll probably stumble, we'll probably fall, we'll probably fail. And a lot of times we think that that makes us a failure. But that's not what Jesus says. Jesus instead picks us up, puts us back on the waves, and said, let's do this again. Our story this morning is in Matthew 14, 25 through 33. You guys can turn there in your Bibles. It'll be on the screen as well. But I want to give you a little bit of background. This story happens right after Jesus performs one of his most famous miracles where he feeds the 5,000, which was actually probably more like 15,000, with a few loaves of bread and a couple fish. Basically, a little boy's snack. Jesus feeds 5,000 people. After that story, the people want to make Jesus king because this is an economic boon. If we can follow a guy who can feed us and supply our armies and multiply resources, we can take over the world. So they're ready to enthrone Jesus as king. The problem is they want him to be their kind of king, not his kind of king. So Jesus, he tells his disciples to go out, get in a boat, and sail away. But he says, I'm not going to go with you. I'll meet you there. Sail to the other side of the sea. I'll meet you there. I'm going to go pray. I need to be alone with my Father. Now, for these guys, for these disciples, many of them were fishermen, so heading out on a boat was no big deal. This is what they did. It's like asking Tony Hawk to hop on a skateboard. He's good. He's got it. They get in their boat, they head out to sea, but before long, the skies get gray, the wind starts to pick up, the waves start to come over the side of the boat, and they start to panic. Because this is like a storm they've never experienced. Actually, it's a storm they've experienced one other time, and we'll get to that. But these experienced fishermen begin to fear for their lives. And then this amazing moment happens. Let's pick up our story in verse 25 of Matthew 14. It says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. Just take a moment and remember, we've gotten familiar with this, but this is crazy, okay? If you have a pool or a lake in your backyard, go try to take a stroll across it today and see how easy this is. This is a miracle. This is amazing. Jesus is strolling across the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Lord, if it is you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Put yourselves in these disciples' shoes for a moment. You're experiencing this storm that is, let's just say it's a supernatural storm. This is not a normal storm. But I said earlier that there was one other time the disciples had been in a storm like this. And it's interesting because in that story, Jesus is there in the boat. They're up on top, they're freaking out, they're throwing things overboard, they're hanging on to the sides for dear life, and Jesus is napping. Finally, one of the disciples goes to him and he wakes him up and he says, "Jesus, don't you know we're going to drown? Don't you even care what we're going through?" Jesus rubs his eyes and he gets up and he takes a big stretch. Doesn't tell us that, but I'm assuming that's how I wake up. He looks at them and he says, "Come on, guys. You know who you're with." Then he speaks to the storm and it goes away. Now, after that experience, you would think these guys, the next time they go through a storm, they'd have enough faith to make it, right? They've seen what he can do. But here they are, they're on their boat, but this time things are different. This time, Jesus isn't in the boat. It's almost like he's testing them. It's almost like Jesus knew when he sent them out on that boat that they were going to experience a storm, just like the one they experienced before. But this time he wanted to see, will they ride it out? Will they have faith? Will someone on that boat have the courage to speak to the wind and waves? Or will they fail because I'm not there? Because Jesus knew that these disciples, these 12 guys, were going to need to learn what it was like to live without Jesus right next to them. They were going to have to figure out what it was like to go through life without him holding their hands the whole way. And so he sends them out onto the lake. You know, if Jesus can calm a storm with his voice, I wonder if he can start a storm. I wonder if Jesus didn't climb up the mountain to go talk to God and look back on the wind and go, "I'm going to send them a little storm." And it says that he waited until 3 o'clock in the morning to walk out to them. So he let them go all night fighting the storm before he came out to them. He could have calmed it from the shore. He could have stopped it when he saw it coming, but he stood there and let them go through it for a while because there was something they needed to learn here. And I think we can learn the same thing. There are some important truths that we can learn from this passage. And the first one is that just because we are following Jesus does not mean we won't encounter any storms. In fact, Jesus might be commanding us to go into the storm. Notice, Jesus tells his disciples to head out on that boat. It is a command. They are following Jesus' words. And they still encounter a storm. We like to think that if we say yes to Jesus, that everything will go smooth for us. If I'm following Jesus, if I'm being faithful, then I'm not going to experience any more hardship. I'm not going to go through storms. People aren't going to rip me off. If I'm being honest and I'm being generous, then other people will respect that. God will protect me. He'll put a hedge of protection around me, right? And everything will be fine. If I trust in God, then my kids won't get bullied at school because we trust in God and they're going to be fine. If I trust in God, then my boss will respect me and give me the best of things at my job. But then it doesn't work that way, does it? And sometimes we think that that is a moment where, are we being punished by God? Or maybe even worse, is God not there or does he not care? Am I going through the storm because God's not as powerful as I thought he was? He's not as good as I thought he was. It can be easy to go through a storm and think that we've done something wrong or that we're following the wrong person. But Jesus never promised us that when we follow him, everything would go well for us. He did not promise us that things would be easy. In fact, he said, in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. Now, sometimes our storms are because we are rebellious, okay? Sometimes we get into storms because we're not listening to God. Jonah, anyone? Okay? Jonah experienced a storm because he was rejecting God's call. God was saying, go to Nineveh, and he said, no thanks. But sometimes, like right here, these disciples are doing everything right. They listened to Jesus, and they still ended up in a storm. But here's the thing, is Jesus often shows up in the midst of the storm. We find Jesus. If we have eyes to see and hearts to understand, we'll start to realize that it's in the midst of the storm that Jesus starts drawing us closer to himself. It's in the midst of the storm that he begins to give us opportunities to go deeper with him. Maybe it's in the midst of the storm that he is calling us to get out of the boat. Storms are an opportunity to look fear in the face and decide to go all in with Jesus anyway. So if you're here today and you're going through the storm, maybe right now you're in the midst of it and you're asking those questions, God, where are you? God, why are you letting this happen? God, what is going on? Maybe he's still trying to bring you closer to him. Maybe this is a moment of an opportunity for you to make a step of faith, to put your trust in him in a deeper way, to stop relying on the boat that you're in and start being willing to step out in faith with Jesus. Because here's our second truth this morning. If you want to walk on water, you have to get out of the boat. If you want to be a water walker, if you want to be someone who does something incredible for Jesus, eventually you're going to have to get out on the boat and walk with him on the water. For many of us, the fear of failure is what keeps us from doing the things that God is calling us to do. We're so afraid to fail that we never do anything. There's a philosopher and a scientist who said that there's a new thing that's happened in the last kind of 100, 150 years called risk lock. It's like gridlock for our souls. We are so risk averse. We're so afraid of failure that many people are just stuck doing the same thing over and over and over again, thinking that maybe this time it'll be different. We end up putting our trust in the boat. Even though the boat didn't save us last time, it was Jesus who calmed the storm. But here they are in the midst of a storm again, and they're all trying to cling to the boat. Because that feels like the safe place. But here's a reality. The safest place is not the boat. The safest place is wherever Jesus is. And if Jesus is on the water, then get out of the boat. So before we criticize Peter for failure, which we are about to do, trust me, he's going to get his, can we give him his flowers for being the only disciple who had the courage to hop over the side of the boat and become a water walker? Even if it was just a few steps before he began to sink, he walked on water. You know, if he's a failure, then what are the 11 other disciples who stayed in the boat? What are they? If Peter failed because he took a few steps on the water and sank, then what are the guys who never had the courage to step out in faith in the first place? Because at some point, Peter gets to brag and say, hey, I stepped on the waves. And you know what else Peter gets to say? He gets to say, when I started to fall, Jesus caught me. Jesus lifted me up, and he pulled me back. Now, Peter isn't being reckless. He's not a daredevil. And this is the thing. Sometimes when we think about going all in, we turn it into this competition about who can do the craziest thing for Jesus. Well, I'm putting my mortgage up. Well, I'm going to sell my car. Well, I'm going to quit my job. That's not the point. Sometimes going all in is simply being faithful right where you are. Sometimes it doesn't mean you have to jump out of an airplane and go skydiving. Sometimes it means you have to be the faithful father you've been called to be. It means you have to stick it out. Maybe it means you just simply have to say yes to counseling with your wife to fix your marriage. Maybe that's the all-in moment for you. Maybe the all-in moment is volunteering for a ministry in your church that nobody else can say yes to. Nobody else is willing, but you're there and you know I'm not the most qualified person for this. I don't really like teenagers. Who does? But I remember when I was a teen, there was that person in our youth group who wasn't great with kids. They weren't dynamic. They didn't wear skinny jeans and have a cool tattoo on their arm, but they still loved me, and that mattered to me. So maybe your moment of going all in, maybe your getting out of the moment is saying yes to the call. And for you, that's going to feel like jumping out of a boat because it's completely out of your comfort zone. But listen to Peter. Peter asked Jesus first. You know, Jesus commanded him to go out onto the water, to go in the boat. And so Peter asked Jesus, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come onto the water. Peter isn't being reckless here. This is maybe the one time in Peter's life that he actually nails it. He has this idea in his head, what if I walk on water? If Jesus is doing it, maybe I can do it. But he doesn't just jump over the boat. He says to Jesus, command me, and I'll come to you. Don't just do something because somebody else is telling you to do it. Listen, it's not your pastor's job to tell you what God is telling you. It's not your wife or your husband's job. It's not your friend's job. It is you and God. Go have a conversation with him. You'll know because there will be this fire that burns in you, and there will be this fear that rises up in you. There will be this thing that says, I should do this, and there will be this other voice that you're going to hear that says, that's crazy. Nobody can walk on water, Peter. And then ask Jesus, is this what I need to do to go all in with you? Yes, it's risky to say yes to Jesus, but consider the alternative. The alternative is you stay in the boat and you get to watch Peter walk on water. So what's your boat? What's the thing that you are putting your comfort and your safety and your security in? What makes you feel safe? That's what a boat represents for these disciples. They thought they were safe in the boat, but the safest place was where Jesus was. So what are you relying on? What are you hoping in? When things get rough, what do you retreat to? That's the thing that Jesus may be calling you to get rid of, to hop out of, so that you can trust in him more. Our final truth this morning is that going all in doesn't mean you never sink. It means that when you do, you know who to call out to. This amazing moment of faithfulness from Peter, where he takes a step. Can you imagine the moment where he's hanging onto the boat still? He's got one foot over the side. He's got his hands clasped to the edge. And the other 11 disciples are in the boat still trying to survive, and he's sitting there ready to hop in the water. And that moment where he lets go and he takes that first step and he stays at Jesus' eye line. Can you imagine how amazing that must have felt for him? For a few moments, everything is perfect. But then the scripture tells us that Peter saw the wind and was afraid. Peter took his eyes off of Jesus. Everything was going according to plan when his eyes were fixed on Jesus. But as soon as he started to notice the wind and the waves, he took his eyes off of Jesus and he focused on his circumstances and he began to sink. But Peter does another amazing thing here. When he starts to sink, he doesn't rely on himself. He doesn't resort to the old way that he would have done it, because every other time he'd been in the water, he had to figure out how to swim his way out of it. But this time, as the wind and waves beat against his face, he turns his eyes back to Jesus. He's knee-deep in the water, and he looks to Jesus and says, "Help me. Save me. Because I can't do this on my own. I can't walk on water without you, Jesus. I can't do amazing things by myself. You have to be a part of this. You have to be the lead on this. Pick me up. Lift me out." When Jesus grabs him and pulls him in close, I don't think this is a moment that we should read as some harsh rebuke from Jesus. I don't think Jesus is chastising him. I think there's a lot of love in the words that Jesus says here. I think Jesus pulls Peter in close so that none of the other disciples can hear. He says, "Why did you doubt? You had it. You were doing it. You were becoming a water walker. Why'd you let fear take over? Why'd you start looking at your circumstances? You knew you could do it. You had your eyes fixed on me, and it was all going well. Why did you doubt, Peter?" You know, it doesn't say that when they get on the boat, Jesus begins to preach a sermon about how much of a failure Peter is and how everybody should learn from his mistake. Somehow they walk back to the boat together, I imagine with their arms around each other. But now Jesus is carrying the weight. They hop over the side of the boat, and the other disciples begin to praise Jesus for exactly who he is, because they can't deny it any longer. He is who he says he is. He is the Son of God. Not because he can walk on water, because Peter just did that. He's the Son of God because when people start to sink, he can lift them back out. And so Jesus calms the storm again, and they worship him. Now, there's another moment in Peter's life that plays out kind of similar to this, and I want to share that with you as we close this morning. The band's going to come forward, and we're going to worship again this morning. But like I said, this story sort of acts as a template for the rest of Peter's life. This is what he does over and over and over again. He has amazing moments, amazing opportunities. He does amazing things. He's the first one to proclaim Jesus as the Lord of the world. He's the first one to recognize it. But he's also very often the first one to fail. There's another moment where Jesus is eating his last supper with his disciples. He's about to go to the cross. And he tells Peter, "Your faith is about to be put to the test in a way that has never been before. You're about to experience something unlike anything." He said, "The devil is about to put you through the ringer, Peter. Get ready." Peter, again, being the bold, outspoken, speak before you think kind of person, a lot like me. Again, I see myself here. Goes, "No, Jesus, I would die for you. I'll go to jail for you. There's nothing that anything the devil could do to me would make me reject you." what you want to hear, right? Like, that's the confession. That's it. Perfect, Peter. No more questions. You know, that's like when we do these close your eyes and raise your hand things in church, and then you go home and there is zero accountability to that decision you just made. There's zero follow-up to that at all. Nobody's going to walk with you. Nobody's going to ask you how you're living out your faith. It's just, I raised my hand at church one time. Jesus looks at Peter and he says, you know what? Before this night is over, you will deny me 3 times. Peter knows exactly how he's going to fail, and he still walks right into it. Because when the storm comes, it can be easy to take your eyes off of Jesus and retreat back to the safety of your boat. And so just a few hours later, Jesus is arrested, and people start to point out Peter and say, you're with him, right? You're one of his people. You're one of his friends. And Peter goes, no, you got it all wrong. I don't know that guy. Then somebody else comes and they say, no, you are definitely with him. I've seen you. You were there. I was there when he fed 5,000. You were right next to him. And Peter goes, nope, not me. You're thinking of some other guy. And then a third time it happens, and Peter denies Jesus. And he experiences the lowest moment of his entire life. This is a bigger failure than anything else he's ever done. At this point, you would think, after all the times that he's failed and been picked up, this would be the one where Jesus would say, you know what, Peter, I'm done. I'm fed up. I've given you 1,000 chances, Peter, to get this right, and every time you screw it up. Because that's what we would do. That's what we do to each other all the time. I gave you 3 chances. That's it. I'm not going to let you learn from your mistake again. But that's not what happens. After Jesus conquers the grave, after his earthly body is resurrected and he walks this world again, he comes to Peter and he meets with him while Peter is out fishing, by the way, which just sidebar, when things get rough, he goes back to what he knows. But Jesus meets him there and he asks him 3 times, Peter, do you love me? The first time Peter says, yes, of course, Jesus. You know I love you. And Jesus says, okay, feed my sheep. Peter's like, all right, got it. No problem, Jesus. And Jesus says it again, Peter, do you love me? Peter's like, yeah, Jesus, I already answered that. Yeah, I love you. All right, take care of my sheep. And the third time, Peter asked him, Jesus asked Peter, and now Peter's upset. He's annoyed. Jesus, what are you doing? Of course I love you. Feed my sheep. Why 3 times? I bet just like when that moment where when Peter heard himself deny Jesus 3 times and he realized what had happened, that moment just began to sink into his heart, I have failed. As he heard Jesus say, Peter, do you love me? And he got 3 chances to say it again. He's got an opportunity to be reinstated. It's just like that moment in the boat where Jesus is picking him up out of the water and saying, I got you. We're going to do this again. Your failure doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to mean your future is ruined. I am still with you if you do what I say, so take care of my people. Peter's failure was real, but it wasn't final. It didn't have the final word. And it doesn't have the final word for you either. Because if you've ever taken a leap of faith with Jesus and you've stumbled, that does not disqualify you from doing it again and again and again. If you've ever said, yes, Jesus, I am all in, I am bought in, I am yours completely, and then you've gone home and you've gone back to the same old sins you've always struggled with, and you think to yourself, well, I guess I just can't do it. He's so fed up with me. Jesus has to be done with me. He's got to be so done with me. He's never going to ask me to do anything great for the kingdom because look at what a failure I am. Hear Jesus' words to Peter. Do you love me? And if you say yes, then do what he says. Because he's picking you up to give you another chance to walk on water. Jesus does not let failure have the final word. He doesn't give up on people who still belong to him. And Jesus comes to broken people, broken disciples, and he invites them again and again and again to follow me, to step out of the boat and start walking on the water. So maybe today you need to make a decision to get out of the boat. Maybe that's the moment for you. You need to step out and go all in. Or maybe today is a moment where you need to do the other thing. Maybe today is a moment where you start to realize, I'm sinking, Jesus. I've taken my eyes off of you and I'm sinking. Save me. And he is ready to catch you. And he is ready to lift you up. This morning, we're going to have our prayer partners come forward. And if you need someone to pray with you, if you need someone to lean on, if you need someone to help kind of be those hands of Jesus here on earth and just lift you up, our prayer partners are going to pray with you. But this is a moment to go all in again. Just like Peter did over and over and over again and again and again, he had to run to the Father. Again and again and again, he had to trust in him because he never quite got it right, but Jesus never gave up on him. And eventually, Peter does incredible things. And that's why Jesus tells Peter early on this rock, Peter, on you, I'm going to build my church. Because I don't need perfect, I just need available. I just need willing hearts. And the same invitation is true for you today. He doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to be available to him. So let's stand together and let's worship. And in just a few minutes, we're going to have two baptisms this morning. So after this song, join us for that and worship with us. Let's sing with all our voices to God.